Okay, so welcome to everybody to this Innovation Roundtable hosted by SAP. The topic today, climate change in Africa and to what extent it is being spoken about in the boardroom. Thank you to everybody for joining. It's a really important topic. We've got a great panel that has joined and we'll do introductions shortly. Just on behalf of myself, Mervyn George, and my co-host, Colin Banks. It's really great to bring important discussions like this to everybody, to executives, to staff members, to people who are passionate about the planet, to people who don't know enough about it, to understand how they can play a role in driving more sustainable business and decision making. So we've got a great panel that's lined up today. I'd like to take an opportunity just to introduce each of them. And when we do that introduction, I would like to give them the opportunity to just share an opening statement on the topic as well. So you should be able to see all of us on screen. I've stopped sharing the screen. So let me start with Kathy. So Kathy Smith, Managing Director at SAP Africa. Kathy, just as part of a very quick opening statement, 1 or 2 minutes, just briefly tell us, why is this topic important to you?
Well, I think this topic is incredibly important to me because as much as we do amazing work in our business, with customers, with partners, if we do, and even with society, if we don't have a planet on which to live in the next few years that is sustainable for our children, for the communities in which we operate, then we certainly are not going to be able to be a successful organization. So we want to be part of the solution to avoid the potential disaster that's awaiting for us if we don't take action now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Sebastian, I'll go to you. Morning. So Sebastian is the Africa Regional Head for Climate Fund Managers. If you can share with us as well, why is this an important topic for you?
For us, it's all over what we do. Our remit is managing climate-oriented funds that invest in different climate themes. Our first fund invests in renewable energy, called Climate Investor One, solar, wind and power projects. Our second fund has a water theme. Our third fund is yet to be launched. We'll have climate landscapes and national parks. So for us, it's our bread and butter to invest in climate change, adaptation and mitigation themes as far as we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Shamini, it's Shamini Harrington, Vice President of Climate Change at Sasol. If we could ask you for some similar opening statement, why is the topic, apart from the fact that you have to do it as a role at your employer, but why is this an important topic for you?
Thanks, Mervyn. So it's critically important for me. I mean, I'm a trained climate change scientist. It's my background. I'm incredibly passionate about what I do, and I want to be part of the solution. So yes, I'm working in a complex environment, climate change, adaptation, mitigation, really at the forefront of everything I do. But just personally, it's part of where I want to be. I want a planet that's thriving, a society that's thriving, and sustainable development is the way to go. So for me, it's close to my heart. Thanks, Mervyn. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Tom, let me come to you. So Tom Fels, Chief Executive of an advisory, a conscious business advisory called Animarim. Is that the right pronunciation?
Animarim, yes.
Animarim, that's it. Okay. Thanks, but also the person trying to drive more focus around business for good and qualification under the B Corp banner, which no doubt we'll hear more of on this call. Tom, same thing for you. Why is this an important topic?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mervyn. I think, first of all, personally, I'm absolutely passionate about the role that business can play in shaping and shifting humankind, and actually the necessity over the next 10 years that that's expedited. And when I look at the climate change conversation, it's impossible to disconnect from so many other of the conversations we're having about a sustainable future, whether it's life on land, life at sea, hunger, poverty alleviation, and economic growth. They all seem to ladder up to climate change. And so what I'm hoping from the conversation today is that we can take a fairly esoteric subject and actually ground it down into some tangible, actionable, understandable components that will inspire people to take action.
Okay, perfect. And then we've got Francis on the line. Francis, are you there? Okay, back online. So Francis Anatogo, who is the secretary for the National Action Committee in Nigeria for Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Francis, the same question to you. Why is this an important topic? Okay, it sounds like there's a bit of a technical challenge there. Francis, can you hear us?
Looks like he's on mute. Maybe if you can unmute yourself, Francis.
Okay, let's see if we can try and get that resolved behind the scenes. In the meantime, what I'll ask. Oh, Francis, perfect. You're back. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. Essentially, from my perspective, which is about trade, about Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is about growing or realizing the African mining vision and all of, with the challenges imposed by, for instance, we have the shrinking of the Lake Chad to about 10% of its original size, which has affected 30 million livelihoods in the sub-region. And that's, you see that manifest in security issues, you see that manifest in poverty and all of that. So really, yes, we want to grow, we want to develop, but we now need to do it in spite of the climate change. So this is really, really important.
Awesome, thank you. We had a slight difficulty with your audio at the start there, but it seemed like the rest of it was fine. Thank you so much, everybody, for that introduction. What I would like to find out from the audience actually is this topic, is when last did you discuss climate change with a colleague? So obviously we're trying to gauge to what extent the topic's being discussed at the in the corporate environment, and especially in the boardroom. The panel is actually allowed to vote here as well, although I would argue that they would answer today.
We would indeed, Mervyn, we would.
Okay, so we've got 60% that have voted. Let's see, okay, 70% have voted. And I'll wait 3 more seconds and then I'll close it. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so let's end the polling and let's show the results. So what we have here is half of the audience have said this week. We've got this month, last 3 months, and a small contingent that have said longer than that. Okay, so why are we asking that? Obviously, we want to understand to what extent this is a topic that is brought up, it's raised, it's talked about, and it almost becomes embedded as part of the day-to-day discussions that you have as a business, right? So let me turn that question to the panel, and maybe I'll ask Kathy again. What or how are you talking about this topic today with your peers, with your leadership team? And what should you be talking about as well?
So I think that more and more, and it is, to be honest, a growing topic of conversation that we are having in the organization. And I will share with everybody that in more and more of my conversations with customers and partners, I am bringing purpose and particularly the discussion around sustainability and climate change in almost every single conversation. And the big thing for me is that this, and I think you used the word daily, this is about our daily decision making and actions. And we try and make it a very complex problem, but actually if every single day when we're talking to our teams, if we're making decisions around how we organize waste in our offices, how we are conscientizing and educating our staff, the ecosystem around us, around the basics of just a good decision making and how you manage things you can impact on a day-to-day basis is the first conversation.
Okay.
Of course, the next is how do you look at your investment decisions and so forth. But I would say it starts really much with what you do every single day and every decision that you make.
Okay. So picking up on that investment aspect, Sebastian, how are you talking about it in the boardroom? You know, obviously you said your projects are driven off sustainability and making positive change, but to what extent is it a key theme of discussion?
Yeah, I think, Mervyn, I should rather talk about our clients, because obviously for us, yeah, our business is driven by investing in climate change themes, and well, let's say avoiding climate change. What we see on our customer side is that mostly they are state off-takers, state utilities, but increasingly also private companies, corporate and industrials, as we call them, who are also pushing for clean energy solutions, clean water solutions, and do not have a national grid that can cater to that. So they jump over or they leapfrog over a state off-taker and try to sign these kind of contracts themselves. And that's quite interesting to see. For instance, in Asia, that leapfrogging is really happening. We invested in a platform of 450 megawatts that of CNI off-takers. So Coca-Cola, Unilever, and the likes, they're all signing up for this rooftop solution type of business, where they see that they cannot get around investing in clean energy, and therefore need to switch from pure grid offtake to a cleaner offtake themselves and take that initiative. Interestingly, in Africa, maybe excluding South Africa for a bit, but because there is some momentum here, but overall in the continent we are way behind, and we just see that companies are find it interesting, but not yet signing up for these kind of things. They still don't have good power supply or good water treatment, but they're waiting for the state to come up with a solution. And what we are hoping that the ongoing conversation with such clients convinces them to actually also start signing up, like we are seeing in Asia, for investing in these type of solutions.
Okay. Okay.
So Francis, maybe a question to you then. Quite interesting, just building on from what Sebastian has mentioned. We see in Africa that there might be a little bit of a resistance to change. Where do you see this coming from? We have organizations like Action Climate 100. We've got those are activist type bodies. We've got incentives for COEs and COOs to change their operational models. Do you think it'll be a carrot or a stick to get organizations to look at climate change and to actually operationalize that?
Yeah, unmute.
Are you on mute?
Yeah, thanks, Collins. I think, let's take the issue of electricity. Electricity has been subsidized. I mean, recently the price of electricity was increased in Nigeria by about, in some bands by as much as 300%, but it's still to a large extent subsidized. There's that expectation that the state will do it. There is on one hand the realization that business needs to happen, and business needs can do better if they have uninterrupted power supply. But getting them to actually look at the numbers and then make the switch is a big problem. So there's a mindset issue there that I think with conversations, with sensitization, and pretty much showing them the numbers, then the shift will happen. There's also the part about financing. So even when you can see the numbers, how many of these companies can finance the off-grid power supply, but what I also see is that to some extent it's still early days, but that disruption is already taking place at homes. People, in Nigeria, power is a major problem. And you see solar panels springing up in homes. So the disruption is actually taking place. It will get to a level and people can then see that this is the way to go. Interestingly as well, there's a willing buyer, willing seller program that we have. So individuals or companies are going to utility companies and say, you know what, I want to pay more, but give me power, because they when they compare the amount they pay generating their own power and the incremental they pay to get power from the grid, it's a no-brainer. So I think is a mix of providing the financing, and by the way, even where the financing exists, is a big problem going through the process of accessing the finance. So there's an education issue there, there's a mindset issue there, and there's an economic issue there. But I think the disruption is taking place.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Shamini, maybe you can comment on some of the disruption. Obviously you work for an organization that is probably in the media quite a bit regarding, what the carbon emissions are like. But at the same time, you and the team are trying to drive substantial change. No doubt there'll be some pressures being applied from different stakeholders. Francis mentioned financing and that being a key, let's say, finding the investment to facilitate that change. What is it that you are seeing? What are the discussions that you are part of? What types of initiatives are you trying to roll out?
Sure, there's a lot there, Marvin. So let me start with, where is this being discussed? So Sasol, let me tell you, put it out there, Sasol is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in South Africa. We emit approximately 62 million tons of CO2 in South Africa. That's substantial. And, often it's bandied around that we emit more than some countries, and that is true. However, we need to understand the profile of why that exists. So we had Francis speak about power. So Sasol does all of that, plus more on one particular site. So we self-generate, we pull in power from the national utility, we make coal to liquids, we make coal to chemicals, we do water purification, all on one facility. So that's all happening in a large emission space in South Africa in one particular plant, which is our plant in Secunda, which is the coal to liquids plant. So our discussions are about remaining relevant into the future. It's about remaining resilient to high carbon prices. It's about being able to contribute to a thriving planet, a thriving society in South Africa. And I think that's important for us. So Francis spoke about, how businesses are changing. And what we've really done is we've built in scenario analysis, we've built in all of the assumptions, we do business cases. This discussion is happening at the highest level in the organization. We see the pressure, we feel the pressure, we see the impacts of climate change. We know our responsibility, we're trying to do the necessary change. It's not happening as fast as we would like it to be, and the reason for that is largely twofold. We've got a financing issue, and Francis spoke about that. There's a funding or a lack of funding towards doing this at pace. And I think that stems from the international negotiations and how the Paris Agreement was set up. And I spent a lot of time on that, being an ex-negotiator. But, in terms of what's happening in South Africa and what's happening here, there's a lack of energy alternatives. And we sit with ability to use renewable energy for power, but renewable energy is not going to run large facilities like what we have. We need a stable feedstock, and without gas in South Africa, without opportunities to leapfrog to hydrogen because costs are so prohibitive, we sit with huge challenges. So what are some of the initiatives we are busy with right now? So there's a lot. I've been very busy for 2 years now. Sasol has literally accelerated our climate change response in response to indicators from Sebastian and the investment teams and what our stakeholders are saying and what society is saying, and also just generally customers are saying they want more sustainable products. So it's happening everywhere. And as Kathy said, we're seeing it from every stakeholder base, a different angle, but it's definitely happening. The conversation is alive today. So we've been busy, we've accelerated and stepped up our response. We've seen a 13% reduction since 2004. It's not that Sasol hasn't done a lot. Our profile was large, even bigger than what it was today. We've reduced by more than 10 million tons already. We've put in place an absolute reduction target last year. We're stepping up in terms of having now already put out an amended climate change embedded strategy for the group that came out actually two months ago. So it's fresh, hot off the press, if I can say that. We're focusing on a much lower carbon emissions profile by 2030 and even more so by 2050. So we're coming out with a 2050 target next year. An emission reduction roadmap was released this year. And I think over the past 2 months, we've released a number of requests for proposals for renewable power. 600 megawatts is what we're trying to aim for, which is probably the largest renewable energy procurement right now in the country. We've put out an RFI for carbon capture and storage. We also put out an RFP to construct 2 10 megawatts renewable power facilities at Secunda and Sasolburg, our other facility. So we're really trying to push hard. We're also going into a number of partnership deals for hydrogen. We're also giving our catalysts to be used to see if we can start accelerating hydrogen development in South Africa. So all of these big things going on at the moment, but really trying to collaborate because there's no one silver bullet here.
So you mentioned you mentioned a lot. Thank you for the insight there. But you also talked about I think you mentioned an RFP for carbon capture. One of the things that I think has been made popular by a recent Netflix series is carbon recycling, as they're doing in Iceland. So is that something that you're looking into as well?
So we're looking at all types of carbon utilization at CCUS, so its storage is part of that. We are at the moment selling our CO2 to the beverage industry. We're looking at opportunities around CO2 to chemicals, CO2 to liquid fuels.
Okay.
Any potential opportunity that can actually use, we've got a lot of CO2. If someone wants it, we're happy to give it away.
Okay.
We will do any potential collaboration in the space right now, even if it's at very nascent level. We want to be able to scale that up to a level that can really deal with the challenge at hand.
So it sounds like there's a broader public challenge that needs to be set up to find innovative ways to consume carbon. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
So Tom, conscious business advisory, right? Maybe let's tweak the question a little bit and ask you, what should people be talking about? And maybe throw another one in there and say, when it comes to employees and I guess all stakeholders, does purpose really matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think as I'm listening to the other panelists speak, I think we have an esteemed panel of people who are extremely educated in the realm of climate change, in environmental sustainability. And it's interesting, if I reflect on what Kathy said when she introduced herself, is that, purposeful actions can be taken every day and should be taken every day to create sustained change. And so if I think of laddering out of very big, very complex, very integrated corporations that have, let's say, a stake in the game of carbon in terms of either emissions or reductions, into, let's say, the middle market of SMEs, I don't think that there's any reason why any size of business should be considering these components, because ultimately they are all related to the role of the corporation in society. And I'm a firm believer that if you can align purpose and align a vision for a business, that you can overlay a blueprint of purpose into your operations, into your impact, into your culture. And Francis said earlier, it's about education, but also it's about the culture of how we think about what we're doing. And so there's absolutely a role to be played in respect of purpose. And increasingly we're seeing interest from not just in South Africa, but around the world if I reflect on the B Corp movement and the B impact assessment, which essentially is the measurement tool for businesses to become certified that look very firmly at ESG measures, the usage of that tool since coronavirus started and we all went into lockdown has gone up by 100% around the world. And so there is more and more interest, and I think there's more and more awareness of the need to make change. I think the consciousness shift is definitely underway, and that it's actually touching more stakeholders than it ever has. So it's an exciting time to be in the space, and I think what we're experiencing is a far more widespread recognition of the problem. But again, I think access to education and tangible solutions is critical for us now.
Okay, I definitely agree that awareness and education is paramount to having continuous impact, right? Positive impact. You mentioned purpose. I can't remember if you mentioned profit, but I want to look at it from Sebastian's perspective. Success in a project, success in investments, quite often measured by some form of ROI, right? So, talk to us a little bit about purpose versus profit. And to what extent that's a factor.
It should be hand in hand, I think is the correct answer. Yes, we are a fund, so in the end there's also request for a profit of the projects that we invest in. But the luck in the way that we have is that the projects that we invest in already have a purpose and replace something that would do damage to the climate. So from that point of view, we are already investing in it. On top of that, we're very active in implementing CSR programs around our projects. All our projects have quite a large footprint. You can imagine a wind facility or solar plant. It requires a couple of acres to roll that out. That has an impact on surrounding communities and stakeholders who previously owned that land. So also doing that right is of key importance. So I think apart from just investing in assets that have a positive impact around the assets, we also think about the purpose and the needs of surrounding communities and stakeholders. Maybe also a comment on what Francis highlighted, this mindset change. I think that's absolutely correct. It's a regulatory framework, an enabling framework from the government, which, by the way, Nigeria is doing very well, to allow businesses to tap into these type of projects. On the one hand, indeed, bottom up from businesses, as just alluded to by Tom, that the ESG mindset needs to be there and needs to be pushed into boardrooms, that this is something that a company needs to do. From a financing point of view, final comment, also interesting to see, well, why are we not signing up more of these projects? Well, the simple answer is linked to your profit question, right? The capital outlay of these projects is pretty high. There's no payback time of a year. You don't sign a contract with a utility where you get a monthly bill, which fluctuates. No, you sign up for 10, 15 years. And that mindset change is also required, right? That you are willing to sign up for a wastewater treatment, your CO2 treatment, your renewable energy plant for a longer period of time. Why? Because the financiers will require the payback of the capital outlay plus a reasonable profit to make their business model work. So that mindset change, I think that theme is indeed an interesting one. It is coming and we're seeing it. In our minds, we hope that that pace accelerates very soon. Okay.
Francis, I don't know if you want to respond to that. I mean, you've obviously working in on behalf of, let's say, public sector right now and the presidency, but prior to that, your background is in energy and oil and gas, as well as management consulting in similar space. I don't know what your thoughts are on, let's say, the expectations on the different stakeholders involved in driving a massive change initiative. Just on mute at the moment, Francis.
So I think let me break it down. I think from my standpoint, in terms of purpose, the purpose is actually very easy, hard to achieve, but very easy. It's about the people. It's about lifting people out of poverty. It's about well-being, and with COVID-19 is about health as well. It's about Nigeria is big on oil and gas resources, and now you have and our foreign exchange comes mostly from oil, and now you have climate change. So and we're seeing the effect of that already in our revenues. But then if you look at it from a broader picture, from a trade picture or a development picture, it's about the agri system, and in fact, I was quite pleased when I saw the policy brief by the Global Center on Adaptation. So which is encouraging that things are being done at a very high level in terms of adapting to climate change. And what I found interesting is they were talking about adapting the system that produce food, protecting and managing water resources, and building the infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure. So if we look at it from that angle, the conversations that are happening, especially if you come down to the grassroots, is about how do we survive if people that are forced to migrate because they've lost their farms, they lost their water resources, and so on. How do they cope? How do you ensure that they don't get into crime? How do you ensure they don't then give up and start migrating to Europe? So those are the conversations that are not at the boardroom, but at the grassroots level. And the way we are looking at it then is that, and from that trade perspective, is that we now need to focus on value chains. So you can't allow the small-time farmers to do everything by themselves. So at some level, we are looking at SME aggregation, and it's already happening in the agri sector. You do your part, someone else picks up a product, processes it, and exports it. So in that case, and obviously the other way around, bringing down the standards, bringing the good good agricultural practices and so on, which also then translates to good practices, conservation, and all of that. So there is a lot happening in that phase, and from that perspective, there's a lot more that needs to happen. But that is the way I am looking at it right now.
Okay.
Great. Francis, you raise a good point there around the value chains. And Shamini, maybe a question to you, both as the sustainability officer for Cecil, but also as an environmental scientist. So the value chains are fairly complex, and really the outcome is obviously, or the consequence of what we're talking around is climate change. But there are a number of factors that underpin all of that. Emissions is simply one of those outcomes. There is things like sustainable sourcing. So where you get your raw materials from, your product design. Are you designing your products in a sustainable way to be part of a circular economy, and what is the recycling or the waste management of that? So how are organizations looking at that at this point in time? Are they paying enough attention to the whole end-to-end process, or are they just looking at maybe emissions or something in isolation?
Okay.
Colin, great question. Oh, Francis, do you want to add something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'll be quick and then you can come in. So Colin, great question, because for a company like ourselves, it's not just about emissions. So our particular aspect of greenhouse gas management, for example, is focused on end-to-end scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, not just scope 1 and 2. And just to give you an idea of what that is, scope 1 is your direct emissions of what comes out of your operations. Scope 2, purchase from the utility, purchase steam, so that's scope 2. Scope 3 is those emissions associated with your product. And it's not just emissions, we're talking about the full value chain, because all types of different activities, transportation of your product, has emissions, has waste, has different issues associated with it. So in developing our greenhouse gas roadmap, now that we've put out this year, we actually developed something called a decision-making framework, which includes people, planet, profit. And I do want to bring the angle of also people into this, because given where we operate in South Africa, given the poverty issues, the unemployment issues, the GDP issues, we can't divorce how we manage our environmental or sustainability issues from the broader social issues as well. So we've developed this framework to help us remain alive to all of the different end-to-end issues that we need to consider. And in developing our roadmap, we chose options that create jobs, that will reduce waste, will reduce air quality pollutants, will ultimately contribute to all-round sustainability for our facilities. And so I think most companies are very much aware of this. Is it happening at pace? And is it being consciously driven? I don't think so. I think you need to really truly embed the philosophy of sustainable development or sustainability. And what Sasol really did very early on is we started tracking the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And we started incorporating into our CSI function, into HR and different areas of the business, how we can start looking at responsible sourcing, how we can look at all of the different circular economy type issues. And it really went fine that now even the procurement manager will say, but Shamini, you know what, does this consider these particular elements? And I think it really, you need a champion, you need someone at board level, you need the philosophies to be driven, and you need the procedures and processes to be in everyone's face in order for it to be driven holistically. So it's not where it needs to be, but certainly at Sasol, I'm seeing these are the best practices to get things going.
Yeah, thanks, Shamini. Kathy, coming to you, just from the tech vendors perspective, obviously SAP is highly influential globally, also heavily embedded amongst a lot of organizations that you could say are some of the largest polluters on the continent, on the planet. But you've got a background in tech, right? I mean, you've worked for multiple multinational tech vendors in leadership capacity. So maybe from your perspective, how should tech firms and how should digital and solutions like that play a role in trying to help?
I mean, I think undoubtedly that tech firms have a huge responsibility to participate more actively in being part of the solution. And if I just think about it from an SAP perspective, one of the things that we have done is really looked at our technology and said, how much of our technology can we develop and modify so that we can help the customers that you just talked about? Because actually, the majority of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions in the world run SAP. And what we've done is announce Climate 21, which is a technology that allows customers to better assess what their impact is on the environment, particularly from a carbon emissions point of view, but also to work on what changes they can make. Sometimes it's the simplest of changes to a process, to a practice, to a skill set that will allow them to improve the ability to reduce carbon emissions. So it is a very exciting announcement we made this year. But also what's really fantastic for me around what tech companies can do, because I think technology is a big part of the solution to the entire sustainability issue, is we have the opportunity to really contribute even more impactfully to the circular economy. And just as a very short example to share with everybody, we are partnering with government, and we're running a pilot in Ghana at the minute. We're partnering with government, the Department of Environmental Affairs. We have a host of other customers who are partnering with us that have a fundamental benefit to understanding or making sure that the way pickers are working with picking waste out of the big land masses that are in place in Ghana in particular, and are being completely disadvantaged. You know, these pickers are really poverty stricken. They don't have access to information or education, and they're really at the bottom of the food chain. And using some of the technology capability we have, we are able to connect the pickers with those companies that need access to the products that they can recycle to reproduce. Let's say, for example, a fabulous soft drink who has to have a plastic to get their product out. That's the kind of thing that we need to start thinking about. It's no longer just about CSR, and I can outsource CSR to sustainability issue and pay somebody to go and make things happen. I think IT companies have to start saying, how can I contribute from a technology point of view to connect, to make things work better so that we can absolutely positively improve the way our environment is thriving at this point in time.
Okay, that's great. That's great to hear. You know, Colin and I were having a bit of it wasn't really heated, but we were having a debate around a particular topic. I was saying one of the things I love to understand is us being the current generation, right? Which mistakes have we made? Which lessons have we learned that we can pass on to the future generations so that hopefully they will drive things in a slightly more positive, consistent way? And Colin was actually disagreeing with that approach and said, well, if you think of his own kids, quite often he's learning a lot from their perspectives, you know. And we realize actually probably that the better question is, how should we be listening to the youth of today and the future leaders, you know, the future residents, and what they think we should be doing to try and protect the world. And if we had to think, you know, many decades into the future, with climate change, with rising sea levels, not only do we need to think about how to protect the planet, but we need to probably start planning longer term for things like subterranean colonies, underwater colonies, and obviously interplanetary travel, as is already being discussed with the Mars project. So maybe just I'll open the floor here and just see, what are your thoughts? You know, should we be learning from the youth? What should we be learning? What kind of transferable insight or wisdom can we share with that future generation of leaders as well?
I have no choice, Mervyn. My 26-year-old daughter has fundamentally changed our home. We have recycling bins everywhere. In my office, I have plants everywhere because, you know, she's just like into this whole speckworm thing and making sure we've got the right, you know, locally sustainable plants everywhere. So I almost feel like we have no choice, just like our kids are educating us a lot around how to use Netflix and all these cool things around social media, etc. I think they are absolutely leading the way around changing our attitude to the environment.
Thanks.
If I can add to that, maybe, Mervyn, I think that philosophically, it's a given that the next generation of consumers and employees and leaders is going to be purpose-driven. And if you look at, you know, Gen Z, I did a project last year with a global liquor company, and you know, the reality for them is that people are just drinking less, especially the younger consumers coming into that 18 to 24 bracket, which is typically the core of their market, because those people value waking up on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, going to yoga, having a more balanced life, you know, enjoying the more sociability aspects of being with their friends. And so if us as leaders today want to be sustainable in business and to have a legacy of, you know, longevity in the industry, we absolutely have to change, because the consumers are actually shaping the culture of the future. And so while we have that pressure at home, in businesses as well, we'll be feeling it, you know, if not already, we'll be feeling it over the next 10 years, like you can't believe, as those consumers come online. They will be shaping the culture of the future.
Thanks, Tom. Francis?
I guess for me, you know, so I see these days I'm consumed by what I do on the AFCFTA, and what I find interacting with stakeholders, both in the leaders in the traditional industries and the youth, is that, you know, if you talk to a typical leader in the traditional industry, he tells you, he moans about power, he moans about policy, he moans about X and Y. And you talk about the youths, you don't even talk, they tell you, they give you 10 possibilities of how something can be done. And before you ask 2 questions, they do a prototype and show you, it can be done. So be it in agriculture, be it in tech or anywhere, these guys are they are squeezing water out of rock. So really, we should be listening more to them.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Shamini, it sounds like you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I just want to add to what Francis raised, because in our initial thinking around how to do climate change at Sasol, we opened it up to the Young Engineers Forum. Innovation, I mean, leaps and bounds, they were going into process efficiencies that we hadn't thought about. The innovation that was coming through, I think there's a hunger to drive change. And I think we just need to listen and be attuned and find the right platforms to channel that energy. I don't particularly agree that activism should be coming from the youth. I feel we should be doing more, and I think we've really not done the right things, and that's why it's happening that way. But now we need to turn this table and start listening more, and I think that's critically important. In business, we need to start bringing them in from university straight in to make the changes that needs to happen, and I think that's what we're trying to focus on now.
Okay.
So yeah, support.
Awesome, thank you. Sebastian, did you have a thought on the same topic around the role of the youth?
Yeah, a lot has been said already. In my country, we say a better environment starts with oneself. And I think that's the conscious mind shift that we're seeing within the youth and within kids, who consciously start understanding what is harmful and damaging to the environment, something which we all probably hadn't thought about when we were young. And I think that is something that should be stimulated, recognized, and indeed onboarded by all of us. Because as soon as you start breathing the whole concept of this is something that is normal, one acts consciously in terms of interface with the environment. That is something that will become the new normal also within companies and within governments.
Okay. The one observation I'd say is if we had the ability to regularly meet with a selection of representatives from different industry sectors and roles as we have on this call, we would probably be able to define a very positive, high momentum way forward, right? And to be able to share ideas. And I think open innovation in that nature can have really positive gains if you align with purpose before profit. What I'd like to do, we just need to start planning closing the call, because we will very soon come up to the hour. I'd like to just give each of you a chance just to have, let's call it a closing comment, but maybe it's a call to action. Maybe there's something that you'd like people to walk away with and think about, that's taking your perspective. Or maybe there's an area where you think that the public generally could help you to drive a particular agenda in this space. So any volunteers and who'd like to go first then?
I'll kick us off.
Go for it, thank you.
So, Mervyn, from my perspective, and I was surprised earlier to see that 56% of the people on the call had, I think, mentioned climate change in the last week, because climate change as a phrase is not a term or a phrase that I would expect to be used very often in the boardroom. I think people would typically be talking about subsets of climate change, contributors to climate change, ESG aspects, and knowing that actually those together combine to either aid or exacerbate climate change. And I think the message from me is that climate change feels esoteric until it's close to home, until you're in Cape Town and you're facing a severe drought and the prospect of standing in queues to get water, until you're in California and you have to evacuate your home because of a fire, or in Australia. And when it comes close to home, suddenly you see that these things are all interconnected. And so taking those individual day-by-day, step-by-step decisions and actions will help us collectively actually prevent those potentially likely futures, and if we don't act in the next decade. So yeah, my call to action to business everywhere, not just big businesses or businesses that are inextricably linked to carbon, but to leaders everywhere to step forward and to take responsibility for what they're doing in their business and to adopt this philosophy of purposeful action so that they become more sustainable. And that's how I see us tackling this, is really collectively through education, awareness, and action. And it's exciting to be playing a big role in that.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Francis, how about yourself?
So I think from my perspective, like Tom said, it's the word. The term climate change doesn't do just now. Okay, let me not use that term. We need to break it down into what people will understand. And that's what I find. We all have good intentions. We understand where we want to go, but for the people that need it the most at the grassroots, they cannot link their daily lives with what you're trying to do. So in most transformation projects, in most development projects, it gets lost in implementation. And part of that is actually spending time in creating awareness, spending time in understanding how the users would use what you want. So that education, that awareness, that listening to the people at the grassroots and actually tailor the solution to solve their problem is what we need, because really the issues are basic. It's actually survival.
Perfect. Thank you. I like to focus on the implementation there. Sebastian, Sebastian, had some thoughts from your side on a call to action, or where people out there?
Not much to add. I think what has been said is probably what I would say as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Shamini?
Thanks, Mervyn. Thanks to all the panelists. I've learned so much. But over and above that, a call to action, more for collaboration, partnership, especially from business like ourselves. We're looking for innovation. We're looking for ideas. We're looking for ways that we can, sustain our operations and still be sustainable and have a reduced profile in terms of emissions, as well as contribute to society. So a call for collaboration, recognition that we can't do this alone, and we want to partner. So to all other business, come speak to us. Other countries, let's speak. Regional cooperation is critically as important as well.
Perfect. That's the right perspective, I think. Start with the invite, right? And Kathy, from your side, just a closing thought on a call to action potentially.
Yeah, so maybe just as a closing comment, from my perspective, the issue and the risk we face with climate change and sustainability is not going to discriminate. It will affect every single person in this entire world and on the planet. And every little step we take, whether we're acting as business leaders or members of society, in our families, wherever we may be, this has to be something that has to be a movement. I love the collaboration drive, Shamini, because I think there is no silver bullet. And whilst we recognize that there's some basic things that have to be done, it is complex in that we have to get people to see the importance and the relevance of this, because it is as the human population that we can make this work. So every bit we can do in every role we have is about how we can get the movement to save the planet. So thank you for making this happen, Mervyn.
No, you're welcome. So what I'd like to share, just as a closing comment, is the way Colin and I have been discussing this, and I think there are 3 dimensions that SAP, as one of the influencing stakeholders, is trying to make a difference, right? The first is at a corporate level, and maybe Colin, maybe you just want to touch on briefly the SAP Cares initiative that we are launching.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mervyn. So I actually long for the time when a topic like sustainability management is actually not spoken about, because it's just embedded in everything that we do. It just becomes a way of life. But part of that is actually an education and awareness, as well as an enabler to get to that point. And as such, SAP is is going to be launching a program fairly soon called SAP Cares, which is specifically around sustainability management, and it covers really 5 main pillars of energy and efficiency emission management. Climate 21, which is our SAP's program about giving customers the visibility on their emissions in their end-to-end supply chain, all the way from their raw materials, all the way through to the distribution to their consumers, as Shamini mentioned. Employee safety, so ensuring that employees are put into or not put into certain areas where there are risks. The circular economy, so around the actual design, the product design, all the way from conception all the way through to reuse or renewing of their products in the circular economy. And then finally, waste and recycling. So how the product actually does end up in its end of life. What happens to that product? How is it collected from an environmental services perspective? Is it waste to energy? Is it taken care of in a sustainable way? So that is the program that SAP is in the process of launching. Kathy mentioned Climate 21, which is one of those 5 pillars, and the remaining are going to be launched in the not too distant future. So Mervyn, from a tech perspective, that's exactly what SAP is looking to do. And like I say, we hope that at one point this will just be embedded as part of SAP's tech stack, and it won't be a topic in its own right. It'll just be a way of companies doing business.
Yeah, I think if I can add to that, it's not just about the products or platforms, right? It's also about the framework to make it easily adoptable to gain incrementally or have incremental gains. But as I was saying, that's the one pillar. So that's at a corporate level where SAP typically would play with its customer base. The second tier that I believe is important is learning and education and awareness. Colin's just mentioned that as well. This is an example, also an initiative that we support. It's you can go to the website shift.how, and this particular example is all around ocean plastic pollution. So if you look at this subset of a challenge that touches on multiple SDGs, you can then go into each of these areas and you can learn how to, for example, replace packaging with technology, how to replace styrofoam with mushrooms, how to use wet wipes that break down in water. And behind that, there'll be a call to action as well. But I think generally, if we created these pockets of relevant learning and content and awareness on a theme that would attract the community, then we would be able to drive, there would be a ripple effect, essentially, to have a bit more focus around how that plays out. And I think the last aspect that I'd like to share is around, let me just stop sharing the screen quickly, okay, is around the focus on action. And Francis, you mentioned implementation being important. The SDG 13 it's not called climate change, it's called climate action. And I think the important aspect there is that you're actually trying to do something about it, right? And one of the initiatives that we've initiated under Africa's Sustainability Council is the call for green tribes. And the idea of the green tribe is that you form a community-based group that has impact on a local problem. Even if it means going to pick up litter at a beach near your home, you've got the ability to create a circle of people within your network, your ecosystem, or your community that can do something small. But if we have lots of those little pebbles of change, before you know it, they fill an entire bag, and that bag has a lot of weight and impact on the world, right? And I think maybe, Shamini, this is tying in with what your call to collaboration and ideation to find ways to innovate with others. If we had the way to create more green tribes where we focus on small change at scale, then we'll have a much larger mindset shift and also joint alignment with this common purpose as well. So I guess my call to action, of Colin's supporting call to action, is speak to us, find out how we can create one of these green tribes to have a local impact on a community scale that people would be passionate about and keen to participate in. So with that, thank you very much, Colin, Kathy, Tom, Shamini, and Francis. Sebastian's already chatted. He had to jump straight into another meeting, so he's exited. But thank you to everybody on the panel, to the audience. Thank you so much for making the time to join this critical conversation. With that, we bid you farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.